Hi everybody, welcome to the UEA Nursing Podcast. My name is Joe Ellis-Gage and today I am joined by Annie and Alana. Hello.
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 And they've come in to talk to us about your experience on your first placement. So your first year students, you've just done your first placement and you're going to come and tell us all about it. So before we get into that, let's just give me a really brief introduction of who you both are.
You go first.
I knew you were going to do that. Hi, I'm Alana. I was on Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. So doing 12.5-hour shifts and night shifts and stuff.
Okay, so kind of in at the deep end,
Yeah.
right into a full clinical setting, lots of shifts, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Hello, I'm Annie. I was on community for my first placement, so it was pretty much 9 till 5, 4 days a week. So quite a lot different to what Alana's been doing.
Good. All right, so it works really well that you two have got really different placement experiences. So when we get students, they all go through different pathways and have different placements in different orders. So it's quite nice to have both of you because you can talk about the different experiences that you had. And most people probably, if you were just imagine your first placement, were probably imagining just a general children's ward, something fairly straightforward and classic. Yeah. And neither of you had that. So that's quite nice that we can talk to you about the two sort of other extremes of nursing placements. So before we even talk about your placement, obviously you are first years, so you have a big kind of block of theory where we try and get you ready for your first placement.
Yeah.
How were you feeling before you went out on placement? Did you feel ready? Were you kind of like eager to get in there? Were you nervous?
I think it was a bit of everything for me. I think I didn't really know what to expect with community. So I kind of went into it with kind of no expectations, and then it was kind of all just positives from there. Obviously, was nervous, like as everyone is, but I didn't feel massively scared.
Yeah.
No, I wasn't that nervous. I was really, really excited because I thought I wanted to go into neonates before my training started. So I was really looking forward to it. But I had an expectation that I wasn't going to be able to do a lot. Yeah. And I was surprised by actually how much the registered nurses let me do. Yeah. And like how much I got to see and experience.
Okay, cool. We'll come back to that because that's quite interesting to know because a lot of people are wondering, they come with it two ways. They either go, I want to do loads and I can't do as much as I hoped, or I'm really nervous, I can't do very much, and then you get to do loads. So we'll see. And I imagine yours is quite different experience in relation to that.
Also, like before you go, you have no idea how much you're going to be able to do. And I think that's probably part of the nervousness that a lot of people feel. And
did either of you have like any relevant experience in any sort of healthcare, childcare, anything like that before?
No,
not babies.
I had never been around children, and no younger siblings or anything, no healthcare.
Yeah, no siblings. I'd like volunteered in primary schools and things.
Oh yeah, I did that. Forgot about that.
And I'd worked with like adults before, but not babies. So I don't know why I have an interest in babies and I didn't work with them before, but I guess it's something different.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, but nothing can really prepare you for either of those two placements, actually, because no one does work experience on neonatal intensive care. It's not really kind of what happens. Okay, so you kind of both went into it fresh, going somewhere that you hadn't really got any idea about and going somewhere that you were really well set on going. And what did you do to prepare yourself for placement? Like, did you do anything? Were you like reading up on stuff? Were you Googling the place you were going? Like, what did you do to get ready?
I, because I knew I was on the Healthy Child programme, I did quite a bit of e-learning about kind of just faltering growth and kind of actually how to weigh babies and all of that stuff that I knew that they would be doing in community. And that was pretty much it, other than like mentally preparing myself.
Bracing yourself for placement.
Yeah.
And did that prep help?
Yeah, I think so. Because I think in community there is a lot of elements to do with policies and kind of the theory to go behind it. I found a lot of that in there, and it was really good to kind of refresh myself of that before going in, I felt.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I bought a massive neonatal textbook for my birthday.
Read it all front to back?
Yeah.
Looked at the pictures.
I treated myself. I just sort of read up on, they emailed me before saying you can look at jaundice and thermoregulation because that's most likely what you'll see.
Yeah.
So I looked at that, and then I just looked at like how the ward's set up. So in neonates, it's very different to your typical general peds. So you have like an intensive care, a high dependency, special. So I sort of just researched like what I'd see in each one and how you'd sort of filter in which babies went in which rooms.
Yeah.
Just to give myself like a general overview of what I'd see.
Yeah. Okay. Because I suppose beforehand you wouldn't have had a clue what a neonatal setup was going to be like at all.
Not really.
You just knew it had babies that were unwell,
Yeah.
and that was about it.
Yeah. So, yeah, and then when I got there, they had like extra teams. They have like a breastfeeding team and a transitional care team and a family care team. So I tried to spend like days with them just to see like what else neonatal teams do rather than just clinical wards.
I mean, you just taught me something I didn't know all of that.
Well, that's interesting because that's kind of the point of this is that you haven't done a neonatal placement yet.
No.
And you might not need to watch this back because you're here, but other people will watch it back and we'll go, oh, I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
And because we often talk about things like spoke placements and other things you can do, and that's great. But sometimes you don't know what the other things you can do actually are.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that for a second. So what else did you do on neonates? That kind of who else did you see other than the classic neonatal team? What did they do?
So I went to transitional care for a couple of shifts, which is where you basically get put on maternity.
Mm-hmm.
So it's where babies are not ill enough to be admitted to NICU, but they are like by the cot side by mum. So they might need like antibiotics and things like that. So it was like a completely different setting, a different ward, which is definitely very different because they're not all hooked up to monitors and stuff like that. And it's definitely very different to NICU. So I spent a couple of shifts on there.
And would you have babies there who have only ever been on transitional care, or babies that have been on neonates and then kind of gone down the route of getting
A bit of both.
Okay.
Because a lot of the time on neonates, you'd find that babies were there for quite a while, so parents would be discharged. So they wouldn't be on the maternity wards anymore. Occasionally when babies were just delivered that were admitted to NICU, you'd ring up to the wards or you'd go over and tell parents, but a lot of the time you don't really go over there. So it was nice to have a couple of shifts there just to see something different. And I went on a spoke day with the family care team. So we went out and visited babies in their homes, and their families was actually really nice because a few babies where I'd missed their discharge, I then saw in their homes.
Oh, okay.
So it was nice to see them like, oh, I'm really sorry I missed your discharge, but I can't believe you're home. And it's so nice to see them. Because you do build up a really close relationship with parents in NICU because they're there for so long.
Yeah, and you're like a few foot away from their bed and them for days and weeks.
Yeah, so it was really nice to go to that spoke day to see patients finally being at home, because that's so much what parents focus on in NICU is I really want to go home. So it was really nice to see that. And especially nice when parents are like, oh, it's so nice to see you. Like it felt like you made a difference, which was really, really nice to hear.
Yeah, that's really nice because actually at a lot of our placements, just the nature of nursing is sometimes you just discharge people and that's it.
Yeah.
Like you see them leave down the corridor and you never kind of get an update unless you've got someone who's got a chronic condition that returns regularly. So actually having that bit of follow through is probably quite a nice way of doing it.
Yeah, well, it's quite nice.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And what about you? Where did you go other than your main placement?
I honestly felt like I was on a spoke day every day because I just went out with, there's a lot of different professionals that work in the community, which I didn't know before going in. It's health visitors, healthy child practitioners, community nurses. I went out on lots of different days and things. I spent the day at GP surgery. Yeah. Which was quite fun because I got to see vaccines and I drew up some of the vaccines. That was quite exciting. I feel like I experienced a lot. I feel like a lot of people don't think that you experience a lot in community. It is a lot of the same skill, but it's in a lot of different settings. Okay. And almost every day it was a change of scenery. So it was people's houses or in a clinic at the base or different places. It was really interesting.
So there's more variety than you kind of expected before you went there.
Definitely, yeah.
So that's interesting because a lot of times, like there's a bit of a stigma around community placements.
Yeah, definitely.
Just that it's not generally when people sign up to do nursing, children, young people's nursing. Some people might think community is where I want to work, but that's not the main focus of most people. They're generally thinking about hospital settings.
Yeah.
So then, well, tell us about it. What's the kind of feeling amongst the group around getting a community setting placement, especially on your first one?
Yeah, well, I think when the subject of placements came out at first, when we were all first at uni, it was kind of everything that everyone was kind of craving about, like, where am I going to be for my placement? And everyone was like, God, I hope I don't get community. Like, oh, I'm dreading my community placement. Like, it's just going to be so boring. And I didn't really have a perception of it until everyone started saying these things. And I was, oh, great, I'm in community. Like, when I found out, I was like, oh, like, everyone says it's really bad and stuff. So that was kind of the, like, only idea I had of it going in. And I don't know what it is that people say that. I think because there's a lot more skills that people don't see that you learn in community, and obviously it is exciting. It is more appealing to students when you can go in a hospital and go and do injections and cannulas and all these different things which aren't necessarily available in community. But you learn, like, I adapted so many like more like communication skills and stuff that you wouldn't even think of. Like, for example, we had a family who didn't speak English and they came in for a clinic, and I was like, well, I don't really know what to do in this situation then. But you just use Google Translate and
you find a way of making it work.
Absolutely fine. But it's just those situations where, I mean, you would come across that in hospital as well, but you have the kind of time with people to really talk to them and get to know them. And it's really interesting. And I think going into someone's house is another level of communication because you're in their safe space. You're almost like, it feels like you're invading their like area, which I felt like quite challenging at first, but you just kind of, you learn to fit to people's ways of communication and things. And
I guess that's a real benefit for them, because if you look at patients, I mean, like Nikki's a prime example of, can you imagine somewhere more uncomfortable to spend your time than sat in a neonatal intensive care department? You're on chairs looking in an alien department, the lights are on, they try and have quiet times and dim the lights and stuff, but it's a fairly full-on environment. So actually being in the community in someone's home is, if it's safe enough and they're well enough to be there, the best place to be, because then they're comfortable, they've got everything they need. But it's a bit weird going into people's houses, I suppose, for the first time.
I think it's also really eye-opening as well, because it wasn't very often that I saw the same people again. But for example, if I saw someone at a base and then saw them at their home later on, it's like really eye-opening to kind of just see the way people are living. And it was quite challenging at times, because obviously not everyone's got a lavish lifestyle, and it's not available to everyone. So I found that quite...
That's interesting, because and we kind of always assume, you kind of think of everyone's house being like your house. And you think of everyone's life being pretty similar to your life, because we all live fairly ordinary lives. But then you realise how deprived some people are in their house, how stretched they are, and how the sort of environment some children are having to grow up in, and how challenging that can be. And that's probably actually a really good skill to have and to know about when you're discharging patients, when you have later placements on the ward or on neonates or wherever, because you had that insight into someone's house already. You kind of know what settings there are, and you might have different considerations about, whether someone's ready to be going home into that environment or not yet.
Yeah, definitely.
And actually, from what you said about the apprehension around the community placements, it doesn't sound like it's based on very much other than a sort of misconception of what communities are like. But also, in a way, you've almost described it as quite a good place to go for your first one, because you don't... I'm guessing you didn't physically do as much, like skill-wise, but you learnt loads of stuff which will be useful for later. And actually, if you go to community maybe much later in your placement cycle, you might be like a bit more frustrated because you're like, well, I want to still be doing my skills. I'm almost qualified now.
Yeah.
So it's quite a good place to go first, maybe.
Yeah, I think it was a really good place to go to get kind of a foundation of skills. And I personally found it really good to see the child development and what it should look like.
Yep.
And that's what I'm like, I find that will be a good foundation for my next placement.
Yeah. Yeah. Because in a way, how can you see someone who isn't developing normally? How can you identify changes and stuff if you haven't seen the normal development and how a healthy child is?
Yeah.
That's why it's called Healthy Child Programme.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the whole basis behind it.
Yeah.
So thinking about like what you did there and what you were saying about, you thought you would do a lot of standing around, not be able to get too stuck in.
Yeah.
How was that different then? What happened?
I think there's a perception in NICU that you don't get to do a lot because the babies are so vulnerable and so small. And yeah, we get prepared in practical, but you don't think you're actually going to be able to do a lot to the babies. So my first day, they were like, tube feed, off you go.
Yeah.
And I was like, sorry, you asked me to do what on my first day? But the team that I worked with were really, really good at being conscious of where I was in my training.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was like, actually, I've never seen it, can I watch you do it? And next time I'll do it and you watch. Or the first time I did a tube feed, like on my own as such, the nurse that I was with said, talk me through how you do it before you do it.
Yep.
So that she could check that I was confident as well. And eventually they were sort of like, here's a baby. And I was like, sorry, you're letting me do what? But it sort of fills you with confidence as well of actually I'm capable of doing a lot more than I thought I was. And especially when your assessor says, I feel confident that you can do it. It's like, oh, other people can see that I can do it too.
Yeah.
So it fills you with a bit more confidence that you can do more.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's kind of a boost because it's quite easy to feel a long way away from being a registered nurse at your point. And I know that I was only 2 years now. It's not that long, but it does feel like quite a long way off.
Yeah.
But those little steps of building confidence, and you were saying, oh, you drew up medications to give the vaccines. You were doing tube feeds, passing NG tubes, all that kind of stuff. It all builds together.
Yeah.
And confidence is actually really important.
I think what was nice as well was in NICU you have like different dependencies. So initially I was put in the lower dependency so I could just be introduced, and it got to I think about 6 weeks into my placement and my assessor actually said to the lead of NICU, please can you put my student in the higher dependency in the intensive care so that she can see more. And I have the confidence in her that like she sort of learn as much as she can learn in the lower bit. So it felt really good that even my assessor had recognised actually I'm capable of learning more and seeing more. So that was really nice to know that like other people can see.
Yeah. Yeah, you're being recognised for it. Yeah. And also, if you were someone who was struggling on that placement, there's an element of reassurance there that they're not going to plunge you in at the deep end until you're ready for it. So actually, everyone learns at different speeds. Everyone has different interests in different things. Actually, if you have a student who's going, oh, I'm going to spend longer in some of the lower dependency rooms, that's fine. Like that's the supportive nature of it is that you only go somewhere when you're ready for it. And you're really, really closely supervised. Like there's the nature of the NICU setup is not only is someone watching you and with you all the time, like you don't do anything without people being in the room because of just the nature of it.
Yeah, there's always a registered nurse in the room, like at least one. So you never feel like you'll never feel like you're alone.
Yeah.
Like if ever I have a question, there's always going to be someone to ask. Or if I'm like, I'm a bit worried about this, there's always someone that I can raise a concern to. Which I think when you're a student, you're a bit worried about raising concerns.
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh, what if it's nothing? Or what if like it's just because I haven't seen it? But the team in NICU are so grateful even if it's nothing, which I actually had a situation, I think it was in like my second or third week, where I was like, this is not normal for this patient. I'd been with it for like 3 shifts in a row. So I was like, this is not normal. And I brought it up to my registered nurse and she was like, actually, I'm not sure this is normal either. But because I'd only been in NICU for a couple of weeks, I was like, oh, I don't really know. And we had the doctors look over and stuff, and everything was fine. But even my assessor was like, well done for saying it, because a lot of students won't have the bravery and the confidence to say it, because even if there was nothing wrong. So in a way I was like, oh, okay, actually I'm a bit more capable than I thought, because I've recognised that something was off.
Yeah, and you had the kind of the guts to go and raise it and not just sort of sit quietly and think someone else, if it was a problem, someone else would have noticed it by now. But she might be the first person to spot it.
Yeah.
And how were your relationships with your supervisors and your assessors? Like, did you kind of work with them much? Did you kind of get on? How did it all kind of work?
I had a great relationship with my supervisor. I think she was a bit like a fairy godmother to me throughout the whole process. I did spend a lot of time with her, and I was really, really lucky that she was really kind of accommodating to my travel, doing the pair document, and all of these different things that were going on. And I think spending a lot of time with her, because she had worked for a very, very long time in nursing, and it was just great to hear all the different like stories, and she like I felt like she transferred so many skills over to me. It was great. I really got along with her, and it really makes a difference to have someone like that.
Yeah, it does. My supervisor mainly worked night shifts.
Okay.
So I think I only met her twice.
Okay.
But my assessor I worked a lot with, and what was nice was she was intensive care trained. So in NICU, when you first qualify as a registered nurse, you don't automatically go into intensive care. So it was nice that my assessor had all that training, so that when I was ready, I could go into intensive care and high dependency. So I could explore all the different parts of NICU. And it was really nice. Initially, I was a bit like scared to ask her to do pair and to just talk about general life stuff, I guess. Because 12.5-hour shifts, you are going to chit chat occasionally. So it was nice that I felt like I could do that with her. And then on my last shift, she actually brought me in some brownie, because she was like, oh, we were talking about baking the other day and how much you love chocolate brownie. So I made some the other day, and I thought I'd bring you in one for your last shift. And it was like, she didn't have to do that. So it was quite nice that I had that relationship with her.
It's quite intense, isn't it, actually? If you go and spend 8 weeks suddenly with someone that you don't normally work with, 12 hours a day or 4 days a week, and you're either like, you're in a setting where you're working really closely with someone, like actually also like physically closely, like you're holding babies together, you're moving around each other, and you do end up getting quite a bond, and you do chat about random stuff, and you chat about your own life and things as well. And you were probably sat in a car with people.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, like, I was saying this the other day, actually, I think that's one of the things that I struggled with a little bit. It was kind of, because you're being professional a lot of the time, like, as a student, obviously, and when I was with my supervisor, I never really knew, and I could, like, kind of switch that off a little bit. And when I was with different people in their cars all day, and because I was with so many different people, there was a lot of having to keep up chatting, keep professional, and keep saying the right things, and like it was quite draining at times, because I was trying to get to know all of these different people like every day, and it was, because it's not just your supervisor that you're working with, it's the whole team,
everybody else.
And even things like when I would go into the office, when everyone was sat there, I'd like try so hard to like get everyone to like me and get along with everyone and find out about their background and all these different things. It is quite a lot.
It's quite a challenge actually, because you're like I think I probably said this to you. It's like you're on a massive job interview. It's like you're on best behaviour at all times, and obviously we don't want you to misbehave, but it's quite hard because it's quite intense, and you're thinking about how you're coming across all the time. Are you being professional, whilst also trying to build a sort of personal relationship with these people at the same time? And you're probably held to a higher standard than the registered nurses that you're working with. And that could be a really tricky thing to get used to. Like, they might be having a laugh or a joke about something. You will, how acceptable is it for me to be involved in that? That's tricky.
I think it's really difficult as well, because as a student, you want everyone to like you so much. But like, I have had a situation where a registered nurse sort of like got annoyed at me for a situation, and I felt very like, oh, I've let myself down as a student, and there's this big stigma of like, you want everyone to like you while you're on shift, but 12.5 hour shifts are stressful. Like everyone's, if you haven't had a break and another nurse is really hungry or they didn't have a good night shift the night before, like there's so many different reasons. But as a student nurse, you just want everyone to like you. And I think it's like okay for other students to know that that's not necessarily going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you might have a shift where you do not behave quite in the way you would always want to, or you might just be a bit tired and not miss something that you wouldn't have missed the day before. That's kind of okay. Like, it's not the end of the world.
Like, you're only a student. Like, you're not going to know everything.
Yeah.
And there was a situation where I didn't know what to do. And so I was like, can I have some help? And one of the registered nurses in the room was like, why aren't you doing anything? And I was like, I'm only a student. Like, I don't know what I'm meant to do. I got help. That's the most that I know what to do. But in that situation, obviously, when a baby is like desaturating, they want to go and help. But I was like, I don't know what to do. But I think it's okay to admit when you don't know what to do, because it's safer for the patient to just admit if you don't know.
Yeah.
So I found it tricky the first couple of times to be like, actually, I'm not really sure.
Yeah. But having the guts to kind of say, I don't know now. Yeah. That's so important than the person who keeps quiet and then doesn't mention it. And if you remember back to when we were doing, we gave you had a really long lecture about recognition of the unwell patient and an ASOE assessment. Yeah. And at the end of each section, we used to say, these are the steps you might take. And I broke it down by like what you can do and what the registered nurse might do. And in your bit was always get help.
Yeah.
A couple of other bits you might do with oxygen or positioning of someone, but the immediate things you can do is get help. Yeah. And if you know when to get help, then you're safe.
Yeah, I think it's hard to know your place as a student sometimes, and like what you can and can't speak up on. Like I was meant to say this earlier when you were talking about like raising concerns and things. I think like there was things sometimes that I thought, should I mention that? Well, like she hasn't said, like my supervisor hasn't said anything, so like they obviously like didn't think it was a problem. And then it's like a battle in your mind, and then it stays with you. But then it is difficult sometimes to just know your place as a student.
And you also get different responses depending who you're working with. So you'd be like, oh, so the last person I worked with did it this way. Yeah. This person's doing it that way. Was one of them wrong, or are they just a different approach? Should I ask them? Should I not? Yeah. I used to always work on the ask like an inquiring kind of question, like, oh, why do we do this like this though? And they go, and they'll either justify it or they won't. If you had a concern, you weren't really sure if it was a concern or not. You do that kind of, can you tell me more about that? Yeah. And then you've raised it, but you haven't challenged anyone if you're not that confident. So thinking about challenges, what was there an example of a biggest challenge you had? I mean, maybe yours was the one you just mentioned about that baby and feeling like they weren't there, or is there something else? Was there?
I think for me, there was a lot of trying to kind of put my personal views aside, which I didn't expect to kind of come into in community. And it's like, this is the way that they're raising your children. You just have to advise people to do it the safest way possible. Yeah. But there's, things like not vaccinating and things like that. I found it really hard to like be like okay with it almost, and kind of just put my personal views aside. And I think it's just the kind of controversial opinions that I struggled with.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. No one can really prepare you for that. I think it's just just part of it, and that will be the same throughout your career, because there's always going to be things that you would do something differently, and you can sort of think, is it big enough that I need to make a point of this, or is it a case of bite my tongue and just get on at this point? What about you?
I think what's really challenging about shift work is it feels quite isolating, because everyone I think has a perception at uni that it's all about socializing and seeing your friends all the time, but when you're on shift work you don't see your friends a lot. So I did 2 night shifts in a row where I didn't see any of my flatmates for like 3 days, because obviously when they're awake you're sleeping, and then as soon as you wake up for your shift and you go on your break, everyone's asleep or everyone's in lectures and stuff, so it's actually quite isolating. So it's quite challenging, like mentally and emotionally, to not like feel like you're missing out on a lot, because obviously our course is quite intense. And that's sort of what you sign up for when you do nursing. Yeah. You know that you're going to have to do 12.5 hour shifts, but I don't think I quite prepared myself for how much I felt like I was going to miss out on
Yeah, so it's actually the impact of the shift working wasn't the physical shift bit, it was everything that came with it.
Yeah, so the actual shift work, I think everyone has a perception that 12.5-hour shifts are going to be really bad. You get used to them, and the physical like aspect of it isn't that bad. It's more the mental part of it and like the emotional bit of, especially on neonates, you've got to be quite quiet and it's quite dark and like all the blinds are shut, so you don't really feel like you get much of a outside view while you're on shift.
It could be any time of day when you're in there, pretty much.
Exactly. So it's quite like it throws you off quite a lot, and then you come home and you're so exhausted physically that you don't feel like you want to be sociable. So it's quite hard to balance, and it took me quite a few weeks to find the balance of being sociable but also looking after myself, because 12.5-hour shifts take it out of you a little bit.
Yeah, they do. And then you would have had the flip side of it, of not doing 12.5 hours, but just being there every day.
Yeah, I think at some points I kind of wished I was just doing like a few 12-hour shifts a week rather than kind of it felt like you were there every day. But there is a nice flexibility to it. But it almost, because I did 4 days a week.
Yeah.
And then I had my CPD day. And then on the Saturday I'd be like recovering from the week, and then it was kind of like I only had one day off.
Sunday,
on the
you're
Sunday.
preparing back for the next day.
Yeah, and then you're worrying about what you're doing the next week. So it is like, it is a lot, but it's nice to have the kind of flexibility. But I was at home during my placement, and I felt a little bit of the isolation. Like I felt like I couldn't do anything in the evening because I was just going to be so shattered the next morning. Even if it was just for like a couple of hours in the evening, I thought, I can't. I just need to sleep and then go back tomorrow morning. And I think,
and doing that for 8 weeks is a long time, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's it's a struggle.
And so I've asked you about challenges. What was the most interesting, most exciting sort of, what was your moment if you were like, someone said, right, tell me about something that was really great that happened on your placement, really interesting? Was there anything in particular that you did or saw?
It's hard to
How long have you got? I think when they let me have the opportunity to go into high dependency and intensive care. So when you're in the lower intensive rooms, it's a lot of tube feeding and nappy changes and things like that.
Yeah.
And then you go into the intensive care and you see babies being extubated and higher ventilators. And on my first day, I got to watch a surgery, which was pretty cool. So in my induction to NICU, they were like, it's really rare to see a surgery, so you probably won't get to see it. My first day in handover, they were like, there's a surgery happening possibly today. And I was like, I want in. And I think as a student, you're a little bit scared to ask to see things and to do things. And I said to myself, no, they said it's really rare. The worst that's going to happen is they say no.
Yeah.
And I don't get to go and watch it. And I just sat in scrubs the whole time. But I got to watch a surgery on my first day, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, and you're right, you've got to ask. Because, they can say, oh, no, it's not appropriate, or someone else is going, or whatever. Yeah. But if you don't ask, you're never going to go. Yeah,
and I also asked the parents as well, because I was like, are you comfortable with me going? And because I'd been with that patient for a couple of days, the dad was like, I'd really be grateful if you were there, because then I know someone's holding my baby's hand
that's nice.
During the surgery as such.
It's reassuring for them,
And then when we came out, I could say to the parents, actually, he was really good. Like, everything was fine. So I think, in a sense, the parents were also really grateful that I went to go as well.
Yeah. Okay. So you had loads of exciting things, basically. You saw lots of interesting things in the high dependency, in the more intensive rooms, and you got to go to theatre on your first shift.
Yeah.
What was the most interesting thing, do you reckon, you saw? Did?
I mean, I think one of the most like simple things that brought me a lot of excitement was actually like children liking me back. Children not like clinging on to me, but like actually wanting to spend time with me and things, because I think it's such a like reassuring thing in this like career, because sometimes you doubt like, oh, am I that good with children? Like, do they actually like me? And then I spent a couple of hours in a group for children with additional needs. It was kind of like a play group, and this one child really struggled with speech and didn't really communicate with people that they didn't know, but they just like absolutely loved me, and they were really talking to me and really playing with me, and it just really touched me. I was like, the parent was like, it's amazing that like they've done that, because they don't normally.
So you made a real difference. And
So I just I literally nearly teared up. I was like, it's just so sweet, and like to know that you might just have something a bit special in you that makes children like warm to you a little bit is really, really reassuring.
And that's something that actually is really important, because we can teach you how to do an injection, how to do a blood pressure, how to do this, that, and the other. But it's quite hard to teach how to gain the trust of a child.
Yeah.
Well, that's where NICU is different, because you can't gain the trust of a child because they're babies. They can't talk to you. So it's a lot more about family-centred care. And I think there was a couple of moments where like a baby would get discharged and the parents actually went, do you want to come for a cuddle before we get discharged? And I was like, wait, you actually, like you've thought about me before you're being discharged. And they were like, we're so grateful. And I think as well, my most heartwarming moment was when I got parent feedback. And I didn't ask for it. So part of the parent document, you can get parent feedback. But I always felt really awkward.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be nice to you just so I can get feedback. So I just didn't.
Yeah.
And I was caring for this patient a couple of times in a week. And the mum actually went to the like clinical educators and went, who can I speak to about my student nurse? And it was really heartwarming. And I got the feedback form. And I actually like nearly teared up on my shift. And it was like, she'll make such a good registered nurse. She was really proactive and we couldn't have asked for any better. And this was a baby that like had some problems that I had to raise with doctors. So I was really worried if I'd done the right thing. So to hear from a parent that they were really grateful for me was like the most heartwarming thing, because then you know you've made a difference, because you don't know if you've made a difference to the actual baby because they can't talk back at you. So yeah, I think that was the most like humbling experience.
Yeah, makes it kind of worthwhile, makes you realise that you're doing a good job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Good. Well, I think you kind of covered the main bits of your placements. Is there anything else you would add, or anything else you kind of think you would have wanted to know as a student prior to your placement, or anything else about your experiences that we've not touched on?
I mean, I don't think you'll ever fully be prepared.
No.
Yeah.
Like, you never know what you're going to see. Every shift is different.
Yeah.
Like, some days you'll go into a shift and you'll feel really amazing, and other days you'll be so tired. Like, you just never know what to expect. So I would just say have a really open mind when going into placement, because you don't know what you're going to love until you do it.
Yeah. Sometimes I actually found it quite refreshing, like putting on like a persona sometimes and going in and kind of switching off from your personal life and being that nurse that you want to be.
Yeah.
And it just kind of, it was nice, I think. And I think I would say to people going into the community, I would say, look at common conditions in babies.
Okay.
Things like oral thrush and cradle cap and things.
Yeah, basic stuff, but stuff that you're going to see a lot of.
Having a fair, even just a really brief knowledge of it before going in would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I think we've covered what we want to cover. Thank you for coming in and having a chat.
That's all right. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
That's all right. I might get you back to another one, do something else next time. So hopefully you found this interesting. If you did, please like it. You can subscribe to the channel to get updates, and you can add comments and questions if you've got anything you want to add below. And thank you very much for watching. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thanks.